Melanie Farrell, and I am the Director of Board and Leadership Development for the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. And I have the pleasure of working with Kate Hickner, who's going to introduce herself in a mere moment, who's the chair of our healthcare law section. And she had brought this presentation to us to provide for all of you today, and I think it's going to be great and really informative. And the focus is on private for-profit physician practices and other businesses. And this webinar will provide an overview of recent developments in telemedicine, options for financial relief and economic stimulus, and workforce safety and employment law considerations. I am going to drop my email in the chat function, and so you can either use chat if you have a question or a thought throughout the webinar, or if you don't want it out to the group and you just want to email it to me, I'll be monitoring that, and then I will bring them to our presenters at the end. So with that, Kate, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Okay, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. As Melanie mentioned, I'm Kate Hickner. I'm a partner at KJK, and I chair our firm's healthcare practice group. I'm a transactional corporate healthcare attorney, but for the past 4 weeks or so, I think I felt more like a COVID-19 attorney. I'm based in our Cleveland office, and I'm licensed in New York, Ohio, and Michigan, and have clients across the country. I'm so delighted to be presenting today with Ronnen Isakov. And as I work with my clients, I've learned that Ronnen's team at Medic Management does a really great job advocating for its clients and providing solid billing, practice management, and other business advice. And I know that he's going to share some additional information about his background later on during the presentation. Ronnen and I have listed our email addresses and links to our bios up on the website. If you have any questions at the end of the presentation, I think we'll have time to answer them, but if we run out of time, please feel free to email Ronnen and I after the presentation as well. Okay, so during the next hour, Ronnen and I are going to share some thoughts on how physician practices and other providers are really going to be able to position themselves for success during these really challenging times. And I'm going to run through some slides during the first half of the webinar, and then Ronnen will share his thoughts. During my half, we're going to cover some recent federal developments that will impact us. I'll focus on telemedicine and the CMS Accelerated and Advanced Payment Program. And then I'll also talk about some potential sources of financial relief for businesses that are struggling. In particular, we'll touch upon SBA loans and business interruption insurance considerations. And then we'll touch upon business obligations for employers and also relief that may be available to employees. So the goal of today's webinar is to really provide practical guidance, even though this is a presentation for the CMBA and for attorneys. We're going to cover several topics that are relatively high level during the next hour. And again, if you have questions afterwards, please feel free to follow up with us. You'll also notice that we've included numerous links to federal and state guidance on the slides, and so there are a lot of resources in here where you can go to find additional information. I think that the links may be the most helpful aspect of this webinar for you. Okay, so let's get started. During the past few weeks, Congress has been very busy. It passed a $8.3 million appropriations bill, which included $500 million in spending for telemedicine. It passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which includes provisions that really significantly impact employers, including healthcare providers. The act included a no cost for COVID-19 testing act, requiring private health insurance plans to cover testing for COVID-19 without imposing cost sharing for the duration of the public health emergency. This includes the cost of administering such approved tests and then also the visits to the healthcare providers for testing. Similar provision for Medicare Advantage. Although many politicians have advocated that all coronavirus-related treatment should be provided without cost to the patient, the bill doesn't go that far. And then perhaps most significantly to date, the CARES Act was signed into law, and we'll discuss this further in greater depth. And you'll notice that I included links to the federal guidance about the bill itself, and then also some summaries that my firm put together. A fourth phase of stimulus is expected to come out today or tomorrow. So there should be, it's important to kind of keep your eyes and ears open. There should be additional developments definitely this week. Okay, so let's focus on the CARES Act for just a moment. The CARES Act provides for a $2 trillion economic stimulus package. The bill is the largest stimulus package in U.S. history, and it's designed to mitigate the harm caused to Americans and businesses by the coronavirus pandemic. It includes $367 billion in support for small businesses through the SBA PPP program, which we'll talk about a little bit further. $500 billion in emergency loans for large businesses, direct payments to individuals, expanded unemployment coverage, relief with respect to federal student loans, the emergency food assistance program. There's tax credits for employers. There are also many types of provisions that are not listed on the slide. So provisions to support local governments regarding retirement account distributions, the Peace Corps, the arts, et cetera. So there's definitely a lot in this act, and I know we'll be hearing about it for months and months to come. And there are certainly provisions of the Act that focus on healthcare providers. So $100 billion was set aside for the Public Health and Social Emergency Fund for hospitals, physicians, and others. $1 billion for the Defense Production Act to address shortages of PPE. Medicare reimbursement increases of 20% for treating coronavirus patients. And then also the elimination of previously scheduled reductions to hospitals. So let's spend just a few more moments on the Public Health and Social Emergency Fund. I mentioned that earlier. There was $100 billion dedicated to that fund. CMS began to distribute $30 billion of the fund on April 10th, and many of our clients have already received direct deposit payments. And basically, all facilities and providers that received Medicare fee-for-service reimbursements in 2019 were eligible for part of that distribution. It was determined on a formulaic basis, so it's not first come, first serve like other provisions of the CARES Act, like the SBA PPP loan, for example. So the amount that each provider or facility received was based upon their proportionate share of the 2019 Medicare fee-for-service reimbursements. And again, most receive those payments via direct deposit. Some will receive a paper check if they normally receive CMS reimbursement via check. There was some press saying that there were no strings attached to these payments, but it's really not true. There are conditions. And in order to retain the payments, providers must sign an attestation within 30 days. The link to that attestation is up here on the slide where it says hhs.gov/provider relief. There's a link to the attestation there. And recipients need to certify that the payments received will only be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. The funds shall only reimburse for healthcare-related expenses or lost revenues attributable to coronavirus. And those are important conditions that not all providers can satisfy. If providers can't attest that those factors are present, they do need to pay the money back and contact HHS to do that. Those who are able to agree to the terms and conditions should, retain documentation to show that the money was used for appropriate purposes. And then there's also a condition that providers must agree not to engage in balance billing with respect to COVID-19 patients. And then, so we just talked about the $30 billion of the $100 billion. That means that $70 billion is left, and there are a lot of questions unanswered with respect to that $70 billion. But we do know that distribution will focus on providers that have been most significantly impacted by the pandemic, and especially those that serve indigent, underserved, and uninsured individuals, or at least that's what the intent is for that $70 billion. So I'm sure more information will be coming out soon on that. So now let's talk about telemedicine for just a moment. During the past few weeks, many of us have received questions about this topic, And as we all know, healthcare providers are quickly and very dramatically moving towards telemedicine to keep their employees and patients safe during the pandemic. On March 17th, 2020, Trump announced that Medicare patients can now visit any doctor by phone or video conference at no additional cost, including through FaceTime, Skype, and other similar services. And it really is a historic breakthrough. Historically, Medicare only reimbursed providers for certain telemedicine services in rural areas at certain locations or for certain brief virtual check-ins. But now, at least during this crisis, there's greater flexibility. So a few of the main points are up here on this slide. There are 3 types of virtual services physicians and others can provide. So telehealth visits, virtual check-ins, and e-visits. There's a lot of CMS guidance out there summarizing the requirements. Maybe a lot might be an overstatement, but there is CMS guidance summarizing the requirements for billing each type of service. And Medicare will pay the same amount for telehealth services as it would if the service was furnished in person. And under certain circumstances, telehealth may be provided by physicians, nurse practitioners, social workers, and others. I think that's an important point. Up here on the slide, there are links to the guidance that I have found most helpful. So I'd encourage you to access those resources if you're addressing these issues. And I just wanted to mention that the flexibility provided by CMS has been echoed by other parts of the federal government as well. So other parts of the federal government are also encouraging telehealth. So the OIG issued a statement to provide increased flexibility. The statement basically says that, ordinarily physicians that routinely reduce or waive costs owed by beneficiaries can implicate the federal anti-kickback statute or CMP prohibitions, but in this context, the OIG is not going to enforce these statutes if providers choose to reduce or waive cost sharing for telehealth visits. So we have some flexibility offered by the OIG for telehealth. There's also some flexibility that's been offered by OCR with respect to HIPAA. OCR has announced that it will not impose penalties for noncompliance with the regulatory requirements under HIPAA against providers as long as they're using good faith to implement telehealth during the pandemic. And the notice provides guidance about what types of applications are permissible or non-permissible. So Apple FaceTime, Facebook Messenger, Skype would be permissible telehealth applications. Those that should not be used are really those that are public-facing. So Facebook Live, TikTok, et cetera, would not be permitted by the OCR, even under this, this guidance that offers additional flexibility. There are a ton of resources out there, really some very excellent resources for providers right now who are quickly implementing telemedicine programs. And I put a few that I found most helpful up here on the slide. The American Medical Association developed an excellent quick guide to telemedicine in practice. The state-level associations, the Ohio State Medical Association in particular, has a great resource page with free webinars regarding consent and security issues. Professional liability insurers, such as the Doctors Company, have frequently asked questions with respect to telemedicine and malpractice liability. So definitely take a minute to check out these and similar resources. And I also put the websites for Ronnen's Medic Management and then my firm up here as well. I know that both of us have resources available to our clients and others. And I just wanted to mention too, though, that the guidance that we're talking about is really focused on the federal considerations, but before proceeding with any new telemedicine program, a provider needs to ensure that all the applicable federal, state, and third-party payer requirements are satisfied, and there's obviously several layers that need to be considered. The state-level developments in this area, there's increasing flexibility there as well. States like Ohio have issued orders suspending enforcement of certain medical board restrictions on telemedicine, those regarding prescriptions and in-person visits in particular. There's also states that are waiving licensure requirements for out-of-state telemedicine providers. the state of Ohio has issued some guidance that's still a little bit ambiguous and underdeveloped, in my opinion, on that topic. But there is some out there, which I'm happy to share with anybody after this presentation. But the important thing is that these laws are changing at the state level, and it's important to be cognizant of them. Okay, so funding for telehealth. Under the CARES Act, there's the COVID-19 telehealth program, and the FCC is going or plans to distribute $200 million to eligible healthcare providers for telecommunications services. So, this is a very valuable program to those that are eligible. Applications, the process opened on April 13th. Only nonprofit and public healthcare providers are eligible to participate. So many of our for-profit practices are not eligible, but for those community health centers and others that can participate, it's a good idea to explore this as a potential option. There is an application online. It's 8 pages. It requests fairly general information about how the applicant will spend the funds, and it does request some supporting documentation. Okay, so now let's talk for just a moment about the CMS Accelerated and Advanced Payment Program. Accelerated and advanced payments have historically been intended to help address cash flow issues for affected Medicare providers and suppliers. So during the past 5 years, the program only received 115 requests. Well, now it's been expanded to most providers and suppliers throughout the country during this public health emergency created by this pandemic. So just during this pandemic, as of April 9th, CMS said that it received 30,000 requests. So think about that, 115 requests in the past 5 years and now 30,000 requests just very recently. It's granted 21,000 of those requests, and it's paid $51 billion to providers already through this program just in the past few weeks. So when we're talking with our clients about liquidity and cash management, this is one more option for them. The eligibility requirements are very basic. Most providers will qualify. They need to have billed Medicare for claims within the past 180 days, not be bankrupt, et cetera. So the factors are up here on this slide, but very, very basic requirements. Most providers and suppliers are able to request up to 100% of the Medicare payment amount for a 3-month period. Payments are supposed to be issued quickly within 7 days. The repayment begins after 120 days after the date of issuance, and it's through an offset to new claims. And then the entire amount advanced needs to be paid back within 210 days. I did want to point out that providers do need to be thoughtful before they apply for this, because if they're not able to pay it back within 210 days, perhaps they've shut down or their volume is still low, CMS does have the ability to charge 10.25% interest on the outstanding balance under a demand note. So for some providers that aren't going to see a quick turnaround, it may be more advantageous to explore loans in an open market. So it's really a fact-specific analysis, like many of these programs where decisions need to be made between SBA loans versus tax credits, et cetera. But it's just something to think about, but this is a good option for many. And then there are a lot of developments additionally for healthcare providers that we don't really have time to cover, but I just wanted to mention that it's important to stay on top of developments. I have personally a list of web pages that I review each day to stay on top of developments, and one that I find the most helpful is up here on the slide, a CMS page. It has a ton of resources that cover CLIA guidance and extensions for quality reporting requirements and all sorts of developments. So I'd encourage you to go ahead and check that out. Okay, so next let's talk about some additional financial relief available. as I mentioned, many of my clients are just figuring out how they're going to survive the next few months, and even those willing to move towards telemedicine often find that telemedicine doesn't bring in sufficient revenue to continue their business, or at least in the same manner. So especially with respect to non-essential medical services. So under the CARES Act, there are numerous provisions designed to help businesses, including physician practices and other providers. One is the Paycheck Protection Program. For many businesses, because there's no personal guarantee or collateral required, and because of the loan forgiveness mechanism and the speed at which the money is available, it's more attractive than traditional SBA disaster loans. The loans can be used to pay employees, rent, mortgage, and bridge loan interest and utilities. Again, the loans are forgivable under certain circumstances. No personal guarantee is required. My firm and many accounting firms have developed calculators to help clients calculate what they're entitled to borrow under the program. There's some great guidance up here at a link it's the uschamber.com website. There's a 2 or 3 page handout on the program, which I find to be in like very plain English, and it's very understandable for many to get a handle on what the program is and whether it would work for them. The last link here is an article that talks about how to prepare for the forgiveness application for this loan, and that has some helpful information in it. 2 more SBA products. There are emergency grants available. And actually, before I move off of that, I'm just going to go back here. I do want to say that it might sound irrelevant to talk about the SBA PPP loan, but the fact, because it's run out of money last week, there are no more funds available, but we do anticipate that more funding will be available this week. So it's a first come, first serve program, but so that others who did not receive an approval will be able to in the future. So that's an important point we should touch upon. So we'll see what happens in the next day or 2 on that front. SBA loans, there's again emergency grants up to $10,000, no repayment required. That application is actually done through the SBA website, the government website, whereas the SBA PPP loans are done through an FDIC-approved lender. It's an important distinction. We also always have these economic injury disaster loans, but again, the terms are less desirable for most compared to the PPP loans. So many are going in the direction of the PPP loans as opposed to the traditional IDL loans that are available, but there are differences in what the funds can be used for. So sometimes it's even desirable to pursue both options. I also just wanted to mention that for existing SBA loans, the principal, interest, and associated fees paid by the SBA for a 6-month period and potential deferments, there's some relief available to those that have existing SBA loans. So other liquidity considerations, we just often tell our clients to don't forget to review loan documents for provisions that could trigger a default. It's important to kind of know what the parameters are in order to make the best decisions possible. We're also spending quite a bit of time discussing business interruption insurance. Most general liability policies provide coverage for losses due to business interruption. Unfortunately, many also have an ISO policy form attached, and those forms exclude losses caused by viruses. And so we'll kind of see how this plays out. Even though there's some ambiguity or frankly strong arguments why the business interruption insurance wouldn't cover losses, we do recommend that to preserve their rights, businesses in general go ahead and file a claim. And before doing so, obviously contact their agent or broker, get a copy of all of their policies of insurance, and review them. And then also stay abreast of litigation and legislation. Many states, including Ohio, have proposed bills that would supersede insurance policies that exempt coverage because of a virus. and these bills would apply retroactively as well. And then, you know, restaurants, for example, in New Orleans and California have brought cases asking the court to declare that insurance policies do not have a pandemic exclusion. So we'll see how those legislative and court actions play out. Under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, certain employers must provide their employees with paid sick leave and expanded family and medical leave for reasons related to COVID-19, and generally up to 2 weeks. And there are certain qualifying reasons. There's, you know, at least 6 of them, but one includes, for example, caring for a child who's unable to attend school or child care related to COVID-19. So many employers are struggling to understand how these emergency paid leave provisions interact with their existing policies, with FMLA. So in general, employees still need to be paid leave under the employer's existing policies. Employers may not require that the employee first take leave under the existing policies before taking emergency paid leave. And if the employee is eligible for paid leave under the emergency paid leave provisions, they can use that during the first 10 days of an unpaid leave under FMLA. So there are ways that to kind of think through how all of these different requirements interact with one another. I put a link to some frequently asked questions at the bottom of the slide, which really goes into all of this in much greater depth. I think that could be helpful to some of you. So we talked about some relief available to continue operations and avoid laying off employees. But some providers and businesses are going to need to lay off employees, and so it's helpful to be aware of the relief provided to individuals. Under the recent federal legislation, there's expanded employment coverage, and the extension of unemployment insurance by 13 weeks, and then an increase by $600 per week for 4 months in addition to the base rates at the state level. There's also pandemic unemployment assistance, accessibility for individuals who have not historically been covered, such as independent contractors, Uber drivers, et cetera. That being said, the latest article that I read this morning said that 22 million individuals in this country are now unemployed nationwide. So think about that, 22 million people. That's a lot of unemployed people. Some states have not been great at processing the applications. Florida, for example, 4% of people who've applied have received benefits. For the expanded coverage for independent contractors, freelancers, et cetera, in Ohio, we're not going to even see Ohio starting to take those applications until mid-May. It will apply retroactively, but there's definitely a delay in getting people money through these programs. Direct payments to individuals, many have already received these payments. One-time $1,200 check to most adults making $75,000 or less, with payments phasing out for those making more than $99,000, and the thresholds are doubled for married couples. $500 payments to every child under 17. Relief to individuals with respect to federal student loan payments. There's payments are suspended and no interest to accrue through September 30th. So that'll be significant for employees that no longer have jobs and have these student loan burdens. It's important to note. And then there's also some relief to individuals from a mortgage perspective. There's a forbearance on federally backed mortgages, there's a forbearance on federally backed mortgage loans up to 60 days. There's a lot of controversy about whether these provisions are actually helpful, considering many lenders require the full amount that subject to the forbearance to be paid at the end of the period. So people question whether that's actually going to be valuable for those homeowners. So I think that's it for my slides, and I'm going to hand this off to Ronnen now.
Great. Get that started. So I just want to firstly thank Kate and Melanie for the invitation to come speak to CMBA. I really appreciate it. As Kate and I have been talking through everything. Make sure it can go down. There you go. I think what you've seen from her is a lot of great information, detailed information from a legal perspective. As she mentioned, shared a lot of links of data. And really what I'm going to try to focus over the next 15, 20 minutes is more from an operational perspective, the conversations we're having with our physician and hospital-based practices, and hopefully things that you can be talking to your clients, or if you're in-house, your conversations as well. So just a quick overview about MMG, Medic Management Group. We are a physician-based managed service organization based in Ohio, but do work literally throughout the country, work in about 29 different states at the moment. We really are a healthcare group that provides operational, management, financial, and revenue cycle or billing services to both independent and private practices, as well as employed or system-aligned groups across the country. And we've been doing this for the past 21 years. I am the managing director of our healthcare advisory group. Been with the firm for 17 of the 20 years. Took a small sabbatical in between while my wife was doing her fellowship. So kind of always been related with Tom and the partners. But my responsibilities is our consulting, our management advisory, and our analytical groups. But I'm doing right now, as Kate was mentioning, as she started, pretty much COVID-19 is kind of, practice management, a lot of day-to-day hand-holding with both our practice leaders, group leaders, as well as our hospital-based practices. I think this is a kind of a apropos little slide for everybody right now. I think we all feel like we're living in a little bit of a Groundhog Day life. Every day just waking up to the unknown. It seems like the same. And then if I could only just teach my dog how to go get laundry and go get supplies, that would be even better. But we as a firm have been, remote staffing for the last 4 weeks, which is, again, just from an internal perspective, a lot of IT related issues that we never thought about. Teaching staff, or who have never really been remote or working at their homes before. Just everything is a little bit different. So it really is truly unique times. As Kate mentioned, really, from our perspective, from a medical practice and business, and most medical practice are still considered essential entities, all facing uninterrupted and potentially unsustainable business models. We gave a similar presentation just about 2 weeks ago, and even in the last 2 weeks, to see the drain on cash, the concerns with the practices is been truly unbelievable. And so, again, a lot of what I want to be talking about today is really some operational cash discussions and conversations that should be happening. As I mentioned, most of our providers or our systems, basically between their E&Ms, which is their office visit based type of work, their procedures or ancillary services, we're seeing about a 60 to 90% decrease in activity for the first days of April 2020 versus 2019. And I think that's been a pretty standard conversation across the country. Again, depending if they're primary care, where they hopefully can still do a little bit more from a telemedicine perspective, versus your surgical subspecialties who, as we've mentioned, are either not doing any elective surgery at all or very limited surgical cases. So really what I'm going to be, as I've mentioned, is really the conversation about the importance of strong leadership and practical operational decisions. And so with that, I really think it's important that we have, the two types of leaders out there. And those are that rationalize issues and say things will bounce back, not a problem. We can handle a 10, 20, 30% decrease. But then those that are really decisive recognizes that things are different. We believe acting quickly will not avoid a drop, but it sure is going to help our recovery a lot faster. And one of the conversations, one of my partners, Tom Ferkovic, who always actually talks about Doug Leone, who's the CEO of Sequoia Capital, who continuously talks about the survival of the quickest avoids the death spiral. And if you look over here, kind of a little slide that we used from his, it's a perfect example of, if the longer you delay making decisions, the harder that steeper fall is going to be. versus the possibility of recovery. And for most of our groups, the recovery won't be available at all. So one of the things we're telling everybody is we just cannot over communicate at the moment. You know, daily communications with your physician partners or your staff, the hospital management is essential. I think I've heard all the wine with the wine conversations, you know, the afternoon of the governors and the evening with Trump and his team seems to be a constant conversation, but that is, you know, it's a daily update of what is happening. I think it's really important that we have those conversations with our clients or our in-house group, that they understand that they can't assume that people know what you're doing or what you're thinking. So you need to be, you know, clear and communicate as much as possible. Again, what we believe is about keeping this open communication, you're going to continue to see success. What we're telling our practices is you have to meet with your staff frequently to update them on the practice. Staff capacity and resilience is a big issue. I mean, they're clearly aware of what is going on around them. They are seeing it firsthand. They're also the first line of defense, having the conversations with the patients, helping to set up those telemedicine you know, discussions, and just being the lifeblood of the practice is really important to keep that staff involved. For us, it's all about this cash. And so to discuss the importance of cash and collections for those of our groups that do their billing in-house, the importance of understanding of every dollar really matters, focusing on their receivables, going after outstanding payments, if it's a Medicaid denial or commercial denial, what is going on that side. And then from the other perspective, the payables, really having the conversation with both your staff to understand an active a role of where you are from an aged payable, having the conversation with your vendors, which we're going to go into in a little bit, understanding where from a cash flow perspective. From a hospital group, what we're telling and what we're seeing, you know, the organization from a staffing, experiencing stress, anxiety, and burnout like they've never experienced before. Specifically those groups and those hospital frontline workers in the emergency room, in the ICUs. We're all admitting and admitting how they are doing work that has just never been seen before, but it is having extreme stress and anxiety on the staff. What we do is also having some of the examples of conversations that are going on is talking to the hospital administration about their emergency preparedness and what they're doing relating to the area specialty. So where our practices can be of assistance. But more important, what we're seeing more and more, and I think, you know, as this conversation has been, you know, 4 weeks in or 5 weeks in already, is what to do when one of your staff or one of your physicians tests positive. What procedures are they putting in place, how they're interviewing, how they're acting, and breaking that all out so we can continue to serve our clients. Also, it's a great time to be communicating with your other commercial landlord as far as the monthly rent payments and any opportunities to defer payments. For many of our practice and private practice groups, the physicians are the owners of the real estate. So it is, you know, how do you have the conversation with the left hand to the right hand versus what payments need to be made? But those are all important to be done. And so what we keep on thinking and deciding and talking about is, what decisions are you making or are you planning to make today? Versus what decisions do you wish you had made? And again, we just feel it is very important to be as decisive as possible. The importance of stress testing your practice is never more needed than it is right now. You know, what we're saying is the first month to 6 weeks in the practice will look reasonably well. And again, once we're ready 4 weeks into it, I'm showing you in a little bit, is that why we think we're doing okay for the first 4 weeks is that we're still receiving our current receivables from prior services. And it's helping to fund our cash flow, but what happens next? And so I put a little table together just to show you one of our big groups. For example, you know, through March 19th, their actual activity, kind of 9 days of business remaining. Prior to that, you can see the drop in charge activity from March of 19th, from March through April, about 50% differential in charge activity. but our payments for the most part are still pretty good. I mean, about 75, 80% of payments. What is going to happen though is those receivables are going to dry up because our charges have decreased by so much. So in the month, in the month of May is where we are really concerned from a cash flow perspective for our clients. Additional items for you to consider is a disruption in the supply of drugs and other non-virus related supplies. We're clearly hearing from Amazon, they're already talking about stopping or extending certain delivery times. The question on the labor shortages, definitely the concern on operating expenses increases for what we have. And then for sure, the margin pressure on the economic downturn is the concern on financial sustainability. And so I'll go through it in a little bit, but the importance of cash and being liquid as much as possible. So what we're doing for a lot of our practices and our groups, and I think this would be a great advice for a lot of your clients as well, is stress testing the practices and the hospital systems. I'm sure you're all doing this right now, but really, as I mentioned, start building all the assumptions. As I showed you, revenues are going to be down anywhere between 10 and 80%, depending on the type of specialty. Even those that are doing and are fully up and running from a telehealth perspective, it is still not the same. The volumes, the amount of patients you can get through, and of course, none of the procedures or active surgical cases that are happening. What we're going through is explaining the importance of breaking out your variable and fixed expenses, truly testing your balance sheet to see how strong it is, and do you have the cash and credit available to really last the next 3 to 18 months? That's I think for most industries, an 18-month is a reasonable perspective. However, I think from the healthcare world, what we're seeing is if we cannot survive the next 3 months, that is going to be the break point for most of our groups. As I mentioned, this slide kind of just talks about a lot of additional items that you should be thinking about, managing your collections, as I mentioned, looking at expenses and on a one-on-one basis, maximizing your benefits under government programs, which Kate has already mentioned, and I'll go through in a little bit. And looking at some of options that you really have available to you. So as she talked about, the importance of liquidity is really important. If we look at our subsidies and advancement programs, as you mentioned, the PPP CARES Act, this first part has closed as of, I think it was like 10 a.m. on Thursday when the SBA ran out of money. But as Kate mentioned, all indication is that there will be a second round, possibly starting as soon as tomorrow or Wednesday. But we are definitely hearing that it will not be the exact same rules and requirements as it was in the first round. A lot of that is to help fund all those groups that had their applications in but didn't get the funding in time. But there is still opportunities for those that have not put in their PPP request to put that in right now. As you mentioned, the economic injury disaster loans, because they're part of the SBA, this first part is closed as of right now, but what we'll see. On the Medicare advanced payment, we've actually had some pretty good success for those groups that did apply for it, as Kate mentioned, what the requirements are. Once the application went in, it was within 48 to say 96 hours, so 2 to 4 days after application, we did have the money in our bank account. As Kate mentioned, again, the importance of understanding that there is a high interest rate and a high payback after the 6 months for independent primary care, or independent practices, I should say, Part B practices, and for hospitals, it's a 1-year payback from the time you receive it. But again, it's a way to just ensure, if you don't need it, to have the cash available for future needs. Again, what's just from a high level, I'll go really quickly here. Kate went through all these different programs, the $100 billion, the $30 billion that's already been used. What we're hearing is the second round of the $30 billion, about $20 billion is going to be allocated to all healthcare entities, and then $10 billion will be really focused on those that are dealing with, mainly from a hospital perspective, the pandemic and the COVID-19 cases. So about 2/3 of the next round is going to be available to all healthcare entities, and it's not just for Medicare, but for those that build commercial as well. And then about 1/3 of it directly relating to COVID. So as Kate talked through it, from a legal perspective on the telehealth, what all the needs are and all the links, what I'm showing here on the next couple of slides, and I know we'll be sharing our slides with you all, is really the operational, the nuts and bolts on how to do a telehealth visit, how to code for it appropriately, depending what type of entity you are. If you're an FQIHC, it's a little bit different to an outpatient or hospital-based practices, but we share all this data with you directly. I also thought it was important to show kind of the telehealth from a new patient consultation perspective. You know, it's still based on the focused on the E&M codes as we know them, but now time or MDM, so medical decision making, is much more paramount. So we created little templates, what we call cheat sheets for our groups and our practices that we're happy to share with everybody on this call or to make available to the membership as well. And again, just this last slide is a kind of a practical template that we've been providing. So what information needs to be filled out by the providers to ensure they get paid for the services that they are providing. Kate mentioned this earlier, but this is an example of the actual PPP, the calculation to determine how much funding it would be available to the groups. Again, it's a little bit outdated since the program closed already on Thursday, but we expect something similar going forward. Just as a matter of interest for many of those that might not have known this, is that when SBA and when the government came out with the PPP the first time around, they expected it to last through June 30th. They expected about 30,000, 40,000 applicants at the first time. And I know one bank alone had 125,000 applicants in the first 72 hours that it opened. So it's unprecedented numbers, which is a reason where we clearly see why the SBA ran out of money in the government. This little part is kind of an important little trick to those of your clients or your hospital systems or your practices that did receive their payroll protection money is the loan forgiveness importance of understanding. So there's actual calculation of how much of the loan that was provided will be forgiven. For the amount that isn't forgiven, it's a 1% interest paid over a 2-year period. So again, still really good funding of money as needed if you can't get the whole amount forgiven. And the forgiveness is really based on 2 main areas: number of employees that are hired back as of June 30th and the total payroll at that time compared to what it was prior. Kate mentioned this as well, but I thought I'd just take a quick screenshot. This is the CARES Provider Relief Fund, the actual eligibility and verification forms that you need to be signing once you receive your money, and it actually states HHS payment on your EOB or on your payment in the bank for the subsidy money that you received. You have 30 days to certify that it's going to be used for the proper purposes. So this is what this is. I'm going to spend the last few minutes of our conversation really talking about what we've done for a lot of our clients, is really focusing and building cash flow projections. And as we've kind of talked throughout this presentation, is what are the scenarios that we're playing out? We believe it has to be looked on a weekly base perspective. So you really know what is going on and what are the variables to be looking at. And so with that, it's really determining our revenue line items for them and using a little bit of historical data, but the most focus is what are we getting in from a fee for service? What are we getting in for any hospital work if we're doing on-call or subsidy work that we're getting, if we're working in any of our clinics, and then really determining our expense incurring line items. So what we've talked about from your income statement and your balance sheet. And our focus for sure is really on payroll and benefits, malpractice, and other payables that might be generated. We believe the importance of really executing the plan, document as necessary, look at your projections, ensure we're following up on a week-to-week basis, reevaluate, reset, and then understand this is a fluid situation. So as I mentioned, what we built for a lot of our groups was, what is the duration of closure? So is it through April 30th, which is pretty sure for all of us right now as we sit on the last couple of days of April? Are we looking through the end of May, or are we possibly even looking through end of July? So run those different scenarios, look at the different revenue generations in the groups, in the health systems, and do a line-by-line conversation for each entity. And the same thing is then what we're looking at from our expense perspective, looking at where our employees are from the salaried, hourly, and our physicians themselves, and other expenses that we mentioned. This is again a little bit busy, but you'll see it hopefully easier on the template. Is we really kind of started building actual, inflows and outflows for our groups, taking actual dollars amounts, looking for the fixed or variable expense, creating when is all these items starting from which week, and determining what it looks like. And here is a kind of a high level one-page summary that we've been doing for all our groups, which we highly recommend that you have those conversations with your practices as well, on a week-to-week basis, looking at where the money is. And so you determine and you know at the end of the day what your cash potential or cash receipts are looking like. In this final section over here, where we talk about our financial activities, again, the use of line of credit. If you haven't done so now, we are definitely recommending, with interest rates being so low, it is time to pull the line, be as cash liquid as you can. And then all the different programs that Kate and myself have mentioned, like the accelerated advance payment, the SBA, some of the stimulus programs that are available to everybody. So in summary, I believe never more of an important time to be proactive. Create your cash flow, your burn rate projections, be decisive in your decision making, communicate with not just your, as I said, with our partners, with our physicians, our staff, the patients in the hospital. It's all about teamwork, keeping everything together. Understand that it's a fluid and changing world we're living in, so be flexible. And at the end of the day, to make sure that we're all trying to be as safe as possible. So with that, I really appreciate again the opportunity to be on this, and I'm going to pass it back on to Kate.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that. I think that was really helpful. Melanie, do we have any questions that were submitted?
No, questions came through email. And we could still take one if anyone wants to chat one in real quick, using the chat function at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. And Melanie, are the slides going to go out to those who registered?
Yeah, so everybody who registered today, the slides are going to go out, and then we're going to share a link to this recording on our channels later. So if anybody wants to watch this, they'll have access to it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Ronnen, do you have anything else, or should we sign off?
I think I'm good. Again, happy to answer any questions. And if somebody thinks of something afterwards, you have our contact information. Happy to help in any way we can. And I think we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Right. Thank you, guys.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye.